Hello again. So, now that you've brought this talent on board, obviously you would like to retain them. You would like to ensure that you're not losing the individual within the next 1 to 6 months. In order to do so, you have to ensure that you keep your talent engaged, well engaged. So, how do you do so? It is important that you get it right from the very beginning, from the start, the moment that employee joins your organization. Now, we would usually recommend that upon hire, you give the new employee a sense of direction and a sense of purpose within the firm. And this can be achieved through the orientation experience. The orientation experience is very critical in determining the success of the new hire in your organization. Why is this important? So, research has shown that 69% of employees stay with a company for more than 3 years if their onboarding experience was awesome. So, you want to retain that talent, make sure that you get onboarding right. So, your new employee orientation really should give the employee an overview, basic information about your company policies. Hopefully, you have that in place, the culture, and the expectations on the job. One of the great tools that you can use for this is an employee handbook. And your employee handbook should define the business, clearly stating what it is that you do and how you achieve what you do in your business. Your company vision and your mission, your work culture, the company structure, and the work expectations. And basically, generally, how we do things in our organization. So, for instance, for some organizations, you may require that your employees wear a t-shirt to work every day, a branded t-shirt to work every day. Obviously, there might be a reason for this. You want the employees having a uniform look. You want them to embrace the culture of the firm. You want the face. You want it to be a branding for your business. You have to ensure that this is clearly stated during the orientation process. And also, it's also important that it's stated even during the interviewing as well. So you have to ensure that the person that you're bringing on board is willing to stick to your requirements in terms of dressing. Some companies may adopt a very flexible style of dressing. For instance, in She Leads Africa, we used to joke that you can walk in your pajamas if you want to, as long as you're doing your job. However, we also expected that employees recognize the environment that they are in and they dress appropriately. So if you're going for a meeting, we don't expect you to go to work in your pajamas. So all of this, it is important that you define this clearly in your employee handbook, and it is defined clearly during the orientation. So that if you have any questions to ask regarding areas in the handbook that are not clear, you're able to clarify that during the onboarding session. I always usually recommend that a new employee is given at least 3 to 6 months to adjust into the role. Yes, I know it's a startup, and obviously we expect people to hit the ground running. But while the employee or the talent that you've hired is expected to hit the ground running, I always recommend that you keep track of what it is that the person is doing. So a typical timeline would be, and I've given you an example in your workbook, is you hire the person, and then if you have other team members in your organization, before the person starts, you assign a body who's going to probably, put the new hire through on basic things that the new hire needs to know about your company, about your culture. And then on day one, you give the employee a handbook to read. You ensure that the employee signs all the necessary forms. And then you could decide to take a few days to do onboarding and skills training. Now, during that training, right after the training, you need to be able to agree on the KPIs and what your expectations are of the employee. I would recommend that at the end of the first month, you review the KPIs. Look through what the individual was able to meet and what needs to be adjusted. Have that discussion with the employee. And then at the 3 to 6 months mark, at the point where you're probably confirming the person. So during this orientation period, the person is on probation. At the end of the 3 to 6 months, you want to discuss or reevaluate the KPIs that has been set for the individual. And then you can also make a decision as to whether or not the person is a right fit for your company, while the person also makes that decision as to whether or not your company is a right fit for him or her. The probation period in itself is an opportunity for yourself as the employer and for the team member to also make a decision regarding whether or not the employee-employer relationship works. So it's important that during this time, you're keeping track of the expectations from the employer side and also the expectations from the employee side. I hope this is clear. After the orientation period, it is also important that you continue to keep the employee engaged. Now, one of the quick wins that you may want to adopt during your onboarding, for instance, would be a welcome gift package, free breakfast or lunch on the first day if you can afford it, or week one. Maybe have lunch and dinner with them so that you get to know the person a lot more. And then try as much as possible to ensure that the tools that the person will be working with are made ready before the person resumes. And then continuously check up on the progress of the employee within your organization. Always do a pulse check. And always feel the pulse of the individual within your organization. You can decide to do this on a monthly basis. You can decide to do it quarterly. Pick what works for your organization. An engaged employee would be one who is engaged in the head, and the heart, and the hands. What does this mean? In the head, it means that the person is mentally engaged in your organization. And the heart, it means that the person is emotionally engaged within your organization. And in the hands, it means the person is engaged in doing the work that he or she is required to do. So you constantly have to make sure that you feel the pulse and ensure that your employees are fully engaged. And how can you make sure that you have an engaged team? Examples or quick tips that you can adopt would be staff recognition, for instance. Try as much as possible to enforce or reward excellent performance and the right behaviors. So, like we said in the beginning, when we said you need to define your talent needs and you need to tie your talent needs to your core values. One quick way whereby you can ensure that your values are promoted within your business is to actually recognize people for reflecting the values that you have put together. If they have the right behavior within your organization that ties in line with your values, reward them. Recognize their efforts. If someone has performed excellently well, say for instance, your salesperson who you had initially thought you would bring on board to increase your sales from 500,000 to 1.1 million, and the person brings in 1.5 million, reward the person. Communication is very key. Ensure that you are inclusive. Ensure that you have open communication with the team about how well you're doing, where you're going, and where you see your company in the next few years and how their career aligns with where your company is going. Make sure that you try as much as possible to provide developmental opportunities. Allow growth, allow innovation, be open to new ideas. You hired them for a reason, so please try as much as possible to not micromanage. Work-life balance is also very important, especially for millennials. So if there are any ways that you can ensure that they have work-life balance, try and make sure that you implement that. Don't overwork them. And I'm sure that with these tips, your team members will be engaged within the organization. But please remember, you always have to think about what works for your organization and what your company strategy is. So whatever tips, whatever perks you like to adopt for your organization, it has to align with who you are and what results you desire. I hope that you're able to adopt some of these tips, and please let us know how well it worked for you.